Welcome back to the channel, guys. Thanks for joining me. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at changing rear brake pads on an Audi A6 on the C7 chassis. Now, they're not quite as straightforward as the front brake pads because you've got the electronic handbrake on this particular chassis. So you're going to have to rewind the motors so you can change the pads. Now, normally you do this with the diagnostics equipment, but I'm going to show you how to do it if you don't have the diagnostics equipment. The tools you're going to require for doing this job are a wire brush, a G-clamp, a 13mm spanner, a fairly sizable flathead screwdriver, a pretty decent strong one, a 7mm Allen key, preferably on the socket like this type. It'll be a lot easier, you'll see why a little bit later, and a small ratchet with, let me just check, a T30 Torx piece on. I'll show you why you need that soon as well. And obviously you need your brake pads. I mean, in the pack you should get your 4 pads. I mean, I've already fitted the pads on one side already, but 4 pads, you get 4 slider springs, your sensor, obviously that's important, and 2 new slider bolts. So now we've got everything ready, let's head outside and we'll show you what you need to do. The first thing you're going to want to do before you do anything is pop the bonnet just at the back here under this flap. You want to undo the cap on the brake fluid reservoir just to allow for the fluid to rise up when you retract the calipers. Now, before you jack the vehicle up and remove the wheel, it's worth noting that you should make sure your parking brake is released before you remove the calipers, or else you're not going to get the caliper off of the disc as you'll be clamped on there. But then you can go ahead and jack the vehicle up, remove the wheel, and remember to put an axle stand underneath the vehicle to make sure the car's not going to drop on you. Before we remove the caliper slider bolts, you should be taking these 2 plugs off just here. You've got this one for your brake pad wear sensor, and you've got a second plug around the back here, which is for your parking brake motor. Now, if you remove both of these plugs first, slide them out the way. Once you've removed both the plugs, it's probably a good idea just to give the 2 13mm bolts for the sliders, just here and here, a little bit of a clean up with the wire brush, just to get all the crap and crud off before you undo them. Once you've cleaned the bolts up, you can then go ahead and remove the brake pad wear sensor cable. If you just pop this little bit up just here to release that cable out, and then the plug, if you notice there's a little notch just here, if you kind of twist it so it falls back like that, then you can turn the whole plug like that, and that will remove itself straight out of the end just like that. And now you're ready to undo the 2 13mm bolts. Once you've slackened both of them off with the spanner, they shouldn't be too tight, but once you've slackened them off with a spanner, you should be able to rotate them out by hand. They should be quite easy to get out. Now, the top bolt, you may notice it's got this big sort of way to wash. I'm not exactly sure what that's for, but you're going to need to keep hold of this bolt to put back in afterwards, because this one doesn't come in the pack. And then you can remove the second bolt from the bottom. Now, this one you can replace with one of the new bolts that comes in the pack. Now, before you remove the caliper, it's worth noting that this clip just at the top here that was holding the plug for the sensor, it's only clipped on, so it's probably worth just pulling that off for now to keep that safe, to make sure you put that back on afterwards. And then it's time to take this caliper off. You're going to need to give it a bit of a wiggle backwards and forwards just to loosen it off a little bit. Now, as you're trying to wiggle this off of the brake pads, it can be quite tricky, so this is where your big flathead screwdriver comes in. If you just give it a bit of a tweak at the front here, both sides, and then underneath, so you're in the back of the caliper, give it a bit of a lift up. You can see there it moved, and then back to the front, just like that. If you just keep doing that, it will eventually come off. Once you've removed the caliper, just lift it up and out of the way. Just on the top there. Just rest it at the top there like that, carefully. And then you can go ahead and remove the brake pads. Now, they might be quite stuck in there, so you may need the old screwdriver again to persuade them out. Just be very careful though. I actually will point out that I'm not actually changing the discs at the moment because they haven't arrived yet, and I'm not using the vehicle at the moment, so I'm going to put the pads on for now, and at a later date I will be changing the discs as well, which is pretty straightforward. It's just a Torx bolt just there, remove that, and the 2 bolts, which is just here and at the top here behind this brake hose. I know that's in the way there, but yeah, it's just them 2 bolts which will allow you to remove the whole frame of the caliper then, and the disc will come straight off. But yeah, let's continue taking the pads out. But if you're changing the discs, obviously it doesn't matter damaging the disc at this stage. That's 1. And that's 2. Now it's worth noting that there's the rear pad that has the sensor in, and then you can go ahead and actually remove, you can see down the bottom here, you've got a metal spring, top and bottom. Now you've got to remove those, pair of them. Probably use a screwdriver again, actually make it a bit easier. 1. There's 2. Now give it a good clean up where the springs sit, front and back, top and bottom, before you put the new springs in. Once you've given it a good clean up around this area, you can then go ahead and put your new springs on, which go on the bottom one. It goes on this way around, because this, if you look down here, this section actually hooks over this. If you see that, push it firmly down, front and back. And the same with the top spring. Look there, that just pops on like so, and the same at the back. Before you go ahead and put the new brake pads in, it's now time to remove the parking brake motor so you can retract it, so you can then get the caliper over the new brake pads. And to do so, it's going to be a bit tricky actually. You're going to turn the caliper around, prop it up somewhere safe down the back there, and you've got these 2 bolts here, this one here and one just here. Give the heads of those a good clean up, and that's where you're going to need your T30 Torx bit to undo them 2 bolts. You may notice the head of them is most likely full of crud and dirt, so you're going to need to dig that out, give it a good clean up, and then you can go ahead and remove them. There we go, that's 1. Once you've removed both of the bolts, it's then a case of literally just wiggling the motor off of the caliper. There's like a rubber O-ring seal under there, so it will be fairly stiff. It's a case of breaking the seal, just like that. There you go, and that will just pop off. Then you just set your motor to one side. And you can see in here actually on my one, it's got a bit of rust on the edge here, so give that a good clean up with the wire brush. Just be very careful that you don't damage the O-ring just around the bottom here though. Once you've given it a good clean up around there, now you're going to need your 7mm Allen key so you can retract the motor inside. You just put it in the end there, because it's actually like a spline fitting in there, if you can just see that. The 7mm Allen key fits perfectly in there, and then you rotate it clockwise all the way until it stops. Now that's stopped there now, and then just back it off about a quarter of a turn, and now you can go ahead and retract the caliper with the G-clamp. So if you take a G-clamp and you fit it in just like so, so the back end of the G-clamp actually sits on the spline bit where you just retracted the inside of it, and obviously the front end will then retract the piston just here. Now it should go back relatively easy. As you turn it, you can see the piston going backwards, retracting. Just go all the way, don't force it too much, just go all the way until it stops. That's it, and you can remove the G-clamp. Once the piston's retracted all the way, you can actually now go ahead and fit the parking brake motor back on. Now to get the motor back on, you might need to give it a little bit of a wiggle just to get the shaft of the motor back into the caliper. And then you can go ahead and put the bolts back in, and you're going to torque these up to 12 Newton meters. Now do each bolt up a little bit at a time, just so it sits back nice and level on the caliper. A little tip if you're having trouble getting this motor back on is to put a little bit of oil on the O-ring just underneath there, and just on the inside of the motor where it sits on the O-ring, and that should go on a lot easier. So once the motor's all secure back onto the caliper and the bolts are tightened up to 12 Newton meters, we can go ahead and put the brake pads back into the holder. Now the first pad you want to put in is the one with the cutout. Now that goes in the rear. Now you have to line these notches up, this notch here and this notch here, obviously in the springs. I'll show you a bit better on the front spring, but how to do that. They should just slot into the springs and slide on nicely. And yeah, as I said, on the front pad, you see the notches here and here, that's where these go. They should just line up like that. You give it a nice firm push and that should pop straight in just like that. Now once you've got the pads in and they're sitting firmly up against the disc, you can then go ahead and put the caliper back over the pads. It should drop on relatively easy, just remembering these are sliders just here that you retract them so the caliper can drop on like that, top and bottom. Now you may have noticed that I haven't put the brake pad wear sensor on yet. Now the design of this vehicle, if you do that first, then you're not going to get the plug through this gap. So it's actually best to put the caliper on first, and then you can go ahead and put the brake pad wear sensor on. It's relatively easy. You take your sensor, and then just in here you get this wire obviously pointing backwards like so, and that just pops into that gap just in there, if you can see that. If you line it up and just push that in until you get a nice firm click on it like that. Now you can go ahead and put the slider bolts back in, remembering to put this bracket back on first though, to hold your brake wear sensor plug. That just clips on just over the top there, and then you can take your old bolt, the one with the weight on it, just go through the bracket, and then you just have to line that up with the slider and do it up hand tight. And then for the bottom bolt, you can actually take one of the new bolts that you get in the box with the brake pads and fit that into the bottom one. Now once they're both fitted in, you can go ahead and torque them up, both of them, to 35 Newton meters. Once they're tightened up, you can then go ahead and reroute the cable for the sensor back into its original position. So first of all, you want to go under here, pop that back on like that, and then you can put the plug back into the bracket, remember, and then you rotate it to lock it into position to make sure that little lug pops through the hole just there. And then you can go ahead and actually plug that back in. Now you can't get these two plugs mixed up because they're actually both different. So the one with the grey piece in the centre goes onto here. Push that firmly back on there, and then put the plug back on for the parking brake. Now push them both on firmly so to make sure they're clipped on and they won't pull off. Now see that one there, that wasn't fully on. Push it to make sure it clicks. There we go, nice and tight. Once everything's all tightened back up and firmly back in position, and you've double checked everything, you can go ahead and actually put the wheel back on the vehicle. And then you may want to start the vehicle up, give the brake pedal a few pumps to make sure it's all back into where it should be and into position. And then if you engage your parking brake on and off a few times, it'll self-calibrate itself back to where it should be. And the last little thing, just to remember to put the cap back on the reservoir. I hope this video has helped you out in some way, and if you have any questions, just leave it in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And as always, don't forget to click the like and subscribe and the bell notification, as it really helps out on the channel. Until next time guys, take care.